Over the last 1,000 days, I built this gigantic power station, which is nuclear powered, running on 4 big old nuclear reactor cores, which powers 4 big old create steam engines, 4 max size ones to be exact, and all of that produces 1.2 million stress units, which then is all stored in the form of energy inside of my big old battery compound, and each one of these is absolutely full, giving us a total of 1.4 billion energy, which is quite a lot, and we're going to need a lot of it for my future projects. However, the projects that we're about to do are not necessarily the ones you think I'm going to be doing, and that's because in a recent episode I said I'm going to be converting this power station into a big Applied Energistics 2 storage building, which I am. However, I am nowhere near ready to start the Applied Energistics 2 rabbit hole, because that needs a lot of things that I haven't got, mainly Certus quartz, a lot of silicon, which you get from Certus quartz, a lot of diamonds, and an awful lot of redstone. And I don't have any redstone at all, hardly, or diamonds for that matter. So it would make sense then for the first thing that I start farming to be redstone, and glowstone, and diamonds and the things I need, and we have all of these spare available buildings in order to be able to do that. But that's not what we're doing, because we're moving away from the power station. We're going to be taking our power via power lines away from here and over to this big old green plains area, where we're going to be building a modern industrial city. And the first farms that we're going to be making inside of this modern industrial city are, of course, that's right, you guessed it, dye farms. What? Yeah, well, the thing is, right, if I'm going to build a modern industrial city, I'm going to need a lot of concrete and terracotta that all needs to be dyed. And whilst I have a piddly little dye farm back at our very first area, just under this building in here, down these ladders, here it is, we've got kind of a dye farm. We've basically got a whole bunch of mushrooms which get composted to be turned into bone meal, which then gets turned into white dye. And we've also got a handful of flowers, which then get bone meal to be turned into, well, those dyes. But I want all of the dyes, and I think the best way of going around doing that, rather than having a big old mushroom farm like this and bits and bobs all over the place, is to build a skyscraper, or a high-rise building more likely, because skyscrapers are very tall and, well, that means building big things. And I don't have anything to build them out of yet, which is why we need a dye farm. So back over here at what will be at some point in the future a big old industrial city, I suppose it's time that I started preparing the area by getting out a big old machine and making flat with all of these little hilly bits. Yes. Oh, look, there's a little pillager outpost over there. And if I remember correctly, over this side, there should be a little witch hut just sneaking around the corner there. And just behind me, there is a meteor there. So this area is going to give us everything we need to get started with the Applied Energistics 2 mod. But we got a long way to go before we get to there. So stay tuned and watch this time lapse. We've now got a big old area ready for building a big old city on. And I'm not 100% sure it's going to be this full size, but at least we've got plenty of area to start working on, and hopefully this grass eventually will all start filling in, because it does look a little bit gross. Anyway, my thoughts are as follows. Obviously, we've still got this area here on the power station, which I thought could be a nice little car park. We could have a bridge coming across here, and then along the front of this line here, we could have some big old high-rises, probably with some smaller buildings at the back that are not necessarily... Oh, geez, I'm picking up all these seeds. That are not necessarily functional, but will add to the aesthetic when we stand back at the power station and look across the river towards the city. I think that could look quite nice. Of course, we're going to need roads and cars and trucks and stuff running about this place, and car parks and all that sort of stuff. And at some point, we're going to need all of that Certus quartz that I found. But right now, what we need is a big old building to put a lot of different dye farms in. And I'm thinking a big old high-rise, probably around about this point here, made of concrete, which we don't have, so we're going to have to do the design and the build of the building later and just try and work out where our floors are going to be so we can get our farms in. And the first farm we need is going to be a bone meal farm, or a white dye farm, I guess. And obviously we can get white dye from flowers and bone meal. We can also get it by crushing bones and cutting flowers. So we can either make a flower farm, which might not be a bad idea because we are getting flowers around here. And speaking of flowers, while we are getting quite a few different varieties over here, it doesn't look like there's anywhere in particular that is giving us lily of the valleys. So we'd only get light grey dye and not white dye. So yeah, flower farm out, bone farm in. And we already have a bone meal farm. In fact, we've got a very successful bone meal farm here underneath my little mining area, which is running off wither skeleton spawners that we found in the nether. And back over at our starter area, we got our big old mushroom farm, bone meal farm thing. So we probably got enough bone meal to last us a lifetime, because we're really not going to need that much white dye. So I suppose I could just run this and steal that on occasion, just like I'm stealing all of the iron from the lighthouse. Or we could find some way of shipping this ridiculous amount of bone meal over to our new area. And back over here, the other thing we could do is go into a little bit of cheaty free cam and see if there are any spawners around that just happen to be skeleton varieties, which could take quite a long time because apparently my free cam goes very slowly. And using that little bit of cheaty free cam, I just happen to have found a skeleton spawner just down here. Quite a long way down here, and yes, it's not going to render in, but I can see the chest. But I can absolutely assure you when we get closer that there is indeed a skeleton spawner just here, which is very convenient because that's quite close to our power station. So I guess I just need to dig down. When did that ever go wrong? I should probably repair my shovel first, though. That's better. However, that was just one skeleton spawner, and in order to make an effective spawner, really I'd need a few. And I can't be bothered to go looking around underground for ages, so instead what we're going to do is come into one of these chests, this one here, get some rich soil, make some more rich soil with dirt, straw, bone meal and tree bark. I have an absolute ton of tree bark, I have an absolute ton of straw, I have plenty of dirt, and as we've already seen, I've got plenty of bone meal. And I think 3 stacks will be way more than enough. And let's go turn all of that into rich soil so we can make a brand new bone meal farm out of mushrooms, because it's just nice and easy, isn't it? And then I can use my little ticking one thing and actually make it work. There we go, loads of rich soil, but I've been cheating, peeps. I completely forgot after I did the thumbnail for the last video, the sun has not been moving. I wondered why it never went nighttime while I was doing all of this flattening and all, oh geez. Yeah, that's better. Anyway, now we've got rich soil, what we need to do is nothing to do with making mushrooms or white dye. We need to plan out our first skyscraper. Yeah, I've just dealt with those pillagers. Anyway, to plan out a skyscraper, we're going to need a whole bunch of metal girders, and we're also going to need a whole bunch of smooth stone. I've got a bunch of smooth stone slabs, and that's basically for the concrete between the floors because we don't have any actual concrete yet. However, what we could use instead, something that might look a little bit like concrete, is if we get a whole bunch of, I guess, stone, because we've got loads of it, and bring it over to our mason table and put it on there. This sanded stone kind of looks a little bit like actual concrete for buildings and stuff. And bearing in mind, this is just going in between the floors, so you're never really going to see it. I think it's the perfect stuff. So back over here then, let's plan out our first floor. I guess we don't want to be too close to this edge, so let's come in a little bit and let's maybe make some markers around here. We stick our girders in the corners, And let's say that each of our floors, our main rooms, are going to be 12 by 12. Thinking about this, which would be better being 16 by 16 and being chunk aligned. And that means that I actually need to come all the way over here. So let's start that again. And it doesn't need to be 16 by 16, it can be 14 by 14 for the main rooms, but as long as they're chunk aligned, that's going to make life a lot easier for us. And there we go, we've now got our ground floor main room in, which is nicely chunk aligned now. But we don't just want a main room for all of our processing, we're going to need rooms for power to come through, and storage potentially, and an elevator to take us up and down, perhaps even a staircase. So we should probably come out at least another 5 blocks this way. So we've got a nice 4-block space for all of those things going on. And that'll give us space potentially at this end for a little storeroom just there, and an elevator in the middle just here, and then maybe even squeeze in a little staircase at the side just there. And that, I think, is a good size for our first skyscraper. But now we need to put in all of the different floors. And you might be thinking, well, if this is a dye farm, you're going to need 16 floors. Wrong! We don't need 16 floors at all. We actually only need 9 floors, because a lot of the dyes are just going to be crafted from other ones without requiring any processing at all. So, yeah, 9 floors. And I guess each floor should be at least 5 blocks high. And if it's 5 blocks high, that means at this point here, where our first floor would be, we would have the concrete, we would have some sort of ceiling material on that side, and then we would have the floor material on that side, giving us a gap in the middle to be able to put in, well, wires and electrics and all that sort of stuff, and still have enough room underneath for the majority of our processing things. However, just grabbing some rudimentary materials, how's this going to look from the front in terms of windows and doors? So our wall would actually be here like this. We would have something like that for the windowsill, and then that would come up to there like that. Would probably have some sort of trim around this sort of point here on the walls, and then our window would go in there. That's probably about right, but I feel like it's a little short. Perhaps we should go up 6. And then our inner layer of concrete would be there, our little bit of building trim would be there, and that means that our main part of the building would be more like that, which means we would have slightly bigger windows at the front potentially, and I think by the time this thing's finished, that's probably going to be a more reasonable size. So I guess let's build up the front facade of this building, see how tall it's going to be with all of its 9 floors, and then we'll start putting in the floors at various levels. Oh, jeez. And now that all the framework is in place, we can get a good idea for what the front of this little skyline is going to look like. Now, this is probably going to be one of the taller buildings in this area, but still, it's pretty tall. And it has absolutely no floors in yet, and I think it's probably a good time for us to designate all of the different floors, with the first one, or the ground floor, being the area where we have our storage and our facilities for collecting the storage. And my backpack keeps feeding me golden carrots. Stop it. Unfortunately, I have a new backpack from a skeleton that was wandering about, so they can go in there, and now I should only get fed bread. So yeah, we'll have our storage collection down here, and I think we should start with our bone meal right at the top, because I'm a moron. And then we'll work our way down through the different colours all the way to the bottom, and the good thing about this is I can only fly up to this point here, because it's too big. Jeez, we can really do with an elevator or something here to get us up, but at the moment I just have to sort of bunny hop up these blocks that I've put here so that I can actually make my way to the top to put the floor in at the top. Now, this is obviously going to be the roof, so we don't need to be up here. So our first level, our bone meal, is going to be at this point here, and I think I'm just going to put all of this stuff in as the actual floor we're going to build on. Or should I? No, I want to do these out of tuff. This was supposed to go in between the floor and the ceiling, but we don't actually need anything there because a gap would be better. So I think I'm going to go make some nice variations of tuff to do these things with. And fortunately, we do have a ridiculous amount of tuff, so that shouldn't be a problem. And I think we'll have some eroded tuff, some sanded tuff, and perhaps a few rounded tough stone bricks. And what better way to place these than completely randomly with this trowel rather than trying to make it all look nice, because, well, realistically I don't have time to make every single one of these floors all look unique and interesting, so I'm just going to spam this in, see what it looks like, and hopefully that'll do. And you're probably never going to even notice because it's going to have all of the machines and mushrooms and all that sort of stuff sitting on it. And there we go. We've now got a decent sized platform to start building our mushroom farm on. And I put a little bit just here as well for our little storeroom, or whatever's going to be going in here. So a bone meal farm then. We don't just want this to create white dye to make us, well, white dye. We also want this to create a whole bunch of bone meal that's going to help us with growing all of the plants and things that we're going to be using to create the other dyes with. So we want this to be as big and efficient as possible for the space that we've got for ourselves. So I guess what we need to do is leave room for our little minecart contraction, which is going to be collecting them, and then come up with a relatively space optimized composting system. So I think the best thing to do would be literally to bring this all the way up to the side of the wall, have it several layers deep, and then have our little minecart contraption running backwards and forwards, emptying the items out into a composter where they can all get sent downstairs into a storage system, which then can be sent back up to other floors as required. That should do nicely. And I think this entire platform being 8 blocks by 14 blocks is going to be more than enough mushrooms to us to generate a ridiculous amount of compost, leaving us a reasonable sized amount of room at this side of the room for all of those other bits and bobs. And I am going to skip through creating all of that because I've done it before, and if you're interested in how the mushroom farm goes together, watch my older video from earlier on in this season. And there we go. I now have a nice little mushroom farm with a harvester on it that just goes backwards and forwards, collects all of the mushrooms in that barrel. It'll drop them off here, which will go up this conveyor, down through this hopper into our composter and get all turned into compost. And while this is working okay with no power, of course we need power for our create stuff, which means that we need to start getting our energy from our power station over to here and then turned into rotational power. And for that, I'm going to need a few things. Firstly, I'm going to need the backpack that's got all of my cable stuff in it, particularly these overcharged diamond wires as well as these electrical connectors. And I'm also going to need some form of electric motor. Now we have these ones from the Create Crafts and Additions mod, and then we have a whole different collection of these motors from Create New Age, and these look very expensive. It generates 8,192 SU and can go very quickly, but I'm pretty sure the Crafts and Additions motors can go pretty quickly too. And I also think they don't have to suffer from any efficiency losses from turning the electricity back into rotational power. So I think we should craft a bunch of these up. Maybe we could craft a few of these strong motors up because I haven't got enough redstone for the reinforced ones. Or maybe we could just test out our basic motors, but there's not much SU from those. However, with a strong motor extension, that gives us an additional 800% stress capacity and a whole bunch more energy capacity. That doesn't look too difficult to make, and I also don't have many diamonds. So I think we'll stick with these ones, which means I'm going to have to turn a whole bunch of this brass into brass sheet. I'm going to have to turn a bunch of this copper into wire. I'm going to need a bunch of empty spools in order to create the little copper spools. Let's make... oh, geez. I may have made too many empty spools. And I'm going to need a bunch of capacitors, which is copper sheet, zinc sheet, and redstone torches. I've got plenty of copper sheet. I've got plenty of zinc sheet. And I've got a handful of redstone torches. There we go, now we've got a stack of those. So now all I need is some andesite alloy, that brass sheet that I've crushed, and then we can go to my big old crafter and start putting in the recipe, which I believe is like this. No, that's not right. That wants to be... how do I get it out? That goes at the top. Those go round there like that, and I believe that's the recipe. If I press the button... are we going to end up with a motor or a pile of junk? We got one. Excellent. And now I have 8 of them, which should be more than enough to get us started. So let's head over to my energy facility and figure out how we're going to make a whole bunch of pylons go all of the way over there. I was planning on it all going that way and having my city there, but then I changed my mind to have it over there. So I guess we could probably go down the side of this, across the water there, and end up over there. That makes sense. Okay, so with a little bit of jiggery-pokery later, I now have 3 composters filling up 3 of these things, coming from this thing, which is now on the other side of the room, because that's the side that our power's coming in, and the power was a bit of a problem getting over here. As you can see, what we've got is a whole bunch of these pylons with wires in between going to a motor on the inside of here, which is on a 256 RPM, which is then sending power all the way up to the top of our skyscraper. The problem was, however, unlike shafts from the base Create mods, which don't need the source of the shafts to actually be chunk loaded to know that they're supposed to rotate, these wires don't know there is electricity in them if the chunks with the transformery things are not loaded. So what I've had to do is come over here and do a whole bunch of chunk loading just to get the power through these cables and actually over to there. So I only needed to chunk load up to there where my little green squares are, but of course I've also chunk loaded and force ticked our little skyscraper building here so that our mushrooms will keep on growing even when I'm not in the area, which means we'll keep on getting bone meal. And other than tidying up this floor and making it look all pretty and fixing that and sending our bone meal down to a storage system, that's pretty much it for white dye, which I realise we're not actually producing white dye here, so we should probably do that. Now realistically, this compost isn't going to be coming through all that quickly, as the mushrooms do take a little while to grow. I am considering adding a second layer to this just to improve the speed of their growth, but even with 2 layers or even 3, it's not going to be a particularly fast machine. It's just going to accumulate over time, which means there's very little point in using crushing wheels to crush our bone meal into white dye and a little bit of light grey dye. We may as well just use a mill, which gives us exactly the same amount back. And realistically, all we need to do is take that away from there, pop that mill on there, get that some power, and then just feed that into another chest. But the chest that the white dye needs to go in really does need to go all the way down to the bottom. So what I'm going to do with this spruce trim is I'm going to come all the way to the very bottom here where we've got our power coming in, and I'm just going to run a whole bunch of these all the way from here to the top. And I'm going to hope the distance between the bottom and the top of this skyscraper with these spruce trims is close enough for the storage network to actually pass through. So this needs to come across here like this. It's going to need to go underneath this concrete, and now our little storage system will be able to connect to that and send all of the items down through it. So here's my little plan. We're going to move these out of the way for a second. We're going to put a storage interface just there, and I'm just going to grab a couple more hoppers, and then everything can feed into that. So all of the bone meal should end up in there. That means we don't need those 2 bits there. And then what I'm going to do is go all the way down here, throw a controller on at the bottom, put a simple storage box on top of that, and hope, there we go, it's working. So now our controller knows it's got bone meal coming in from all the way up there. We can now access that from anywhere else in the building, providing we connect it to this. And then we're going to need to get rid of this one, because we then need to create white dye in this space in order to take that into there. So what I think I might actually do is move this storage interface to that point there, have another hopper coming into there like that, have another hopper there, another hopper there, and then our mill can go on the top of that there. We just need power to this. So let's stick on a gearbox there, make it a vertical one if we can, bring a bit of shaft down there, stick a cog onto there, and now we should be making white and grey dye. So if we use our wrench to clear all of those and bring these downstairs to our temporary storage system at the moment, we should start getting white dye and grey dye into these. Well, light grey dye, and that's if we get any. But you can already see we've got a reasonable amount of bone meal down here. So other than making all fancy and nice, that is this little bone meal section done. However, what I do need to do is double this up, because we're not getting enough in here to fill up all of these things. In fact, this one's probably hardly ever going to get any mushrooms at all. And just a few minutes later, we've now got a dual layer mushroom farm, which is just growing so many mushrooms. This thing's constantly backed up, which means we're getting an absolute ton of white dye, a little bit of light grey dye, and a ton of bone meal. But for now, it's time to move on to the next room, and the next room is going to be for black dye. And we've got a couple of options for black dye. The first would be a squid farm, which might be a little bit difficult to build here because we're not in a river or an ocean. The second would be to mill down charcoal or coal in order to get black dye and grey dye as well, which means we just need a little mini tree farm. In fact, sticking out the front of this building, we could even have a little balcony outside, so the tree could grow outside out of the front of the building, and then, you know, all of the processing could go on inside the room here. But there is another option thanks to the Better End mod, or the Better Nether mod, I'm not sure which one, and that is the bulk blasting of ink bush seeds. And ink bush seeds come from ink bushes, and I'm kinda hoping, although I've done absolutely no testing at all, the ink bushes, oh geez, I need to get back up, might work, oh geez, a little bit like mushrooms. And if that's the case, we're on to a winner. If not, we'll have a balcony with a tree on it. Jeez. So back over under the mining town in my storage area, we do have a nether box, and in here I believe we do have ink bush seeds. We do. We've got a few of them. So we just need to figure out how to grow these things and also how to harvest them. So coming outside, let's do some testing. We've got some rich soil, we've got some netherrack, magma blocks, soul soil and soul sandstone. Cannot plant it in rich soil. I can plant it on netherrack, not magma blocks. I can plant it on soul soil, but I can't plant it on soul sandstone. If it can't be planted on rich soil, that could be a problem, but I'm assuming if I was to bone meal this, then we get an ink bush, and that goes through several stages of growth, and then I guess you would harvest it and get the ink bush seed back, but I only seem to get one back when I did that. Let's try that again. Grow it to full size, and then break it. I got 3 that time. Can we automatically grow these without bone meal? And I think the only way to determine that is with a test world. And the easiest way to find that out is to increase the random tick speed and just watch. And yes, they will. That's good to know. The second thing I'd like to know is, can we just get the seeds somehow without breaking them? And I don't think there's going to be a way to do that. No, doesn't seem to be. So we can bone meal them, and it takes a lot of bone meal, but we can bone meal them to go through the growth stages a little bit quicker. And I'm assuming if we've got a diamond hoe with fortune 3, we might stand a chance of getting a few more seeds from this thing. We've got 64 on us, and we've got 5 from that. Now, do we get them at a smaller growth stage? We got 1. And at this growth stage, we just get 1. So they do need to be fully grown in order to get the seeds. But in order for this to generate a reasonable amount of black dye, we're going to need a big old platform's worth of them like we have for our mushrooms, but then we'd need a system to be able to replant them, unless we can use a harvester. There we go, and off you go. It worked! But I didn't put a barrel on it, so I don't know what happened to any of the seeds. They're all falling off the edge. Let's put a barrel in it. Reassemble it, get rid of that with the wrench this time, and do that again. Let's just turn the random tick speed up so they can actually grow, and then it can harvest, and then we can see if this is going to work. It looks like it is. Yes, they're just going to carry on growing. It's going to harvest them, and they're going to carry on growing. This is wonderful. And then in our barrel, look at that. Just from that little bit there, it gets loads. Oh, this is good. Yep, so we've now got a black dye farm. So then all we got to do is put these through a bulk blaster, and that's going to give us black dye. It's not going to give us any grey dye like a charcoal farm would, but this is going to be substantially easier. And just like that, a few minutes later, we now have a fully functional, fully planted black dye farm running off these ink bush seeds, which still need to fully mature so that this thing's actually going to kick into action properly. But it is sending the seeds through this barrel, through this passer block here, into this barrel, where currently they're just collecting because I haven't connected any of this yet, because I wanted to do it with you guys. So all I need to do is get rid of that block there, stick an andesite full on, extend that. They're going to come through here under this lava. They're going to get cooked, and they should, hopefully, once that one's done, end up, there we go, into the system. And as you can see, we now got 3 black dye. So if we hop all the way down to the very bottom, we are now collecting 3 different dyes as well as some bone meal. And that means we can actually craft 4 different dyes with that, because we can mix our white dye with our black dye in order to give us grey dye. So 4 down, 12 to go. How hard could it be? What could possibly go wrong? And now, because it's the next day, because this video is taking way too long to record, everything has actually backed up. The mushroom farm has completely backed up. The composters have backed up. My black dye farm has completely backed up in both this barrel and this barrel. And that's because I didn't put any upgrades on the drawers, so they've backed up. And with the upgrades I had available, I've managed to put one in there, and one in there. But we're going to need a lot more than that, so I'm going to craft up some upgrades, look at all of these mushrooms that have ended up on the floor overnight and think, oops. Then a couple of minutes later, I've now got a bunch of upgrades in these things, 3 in each of those and 2 in that one there. And I would put void upgrades on there, but realistically, when we actually move this to a spot where we're going to be keeping it, we can put threshold switches on the back to basically turn off the machines once they're full, which I probably should have done at this point here, but we've still got so many dye farms to make. And the next one we're going to be building is going to be relatively similar to these ones that we've already done, but vertical. And that's because we're going to be making a cocoa farm, or cocoa bean farm, in order to get brown dye, which means I'm going to need jungle trees and cocoa beans. That's acacia. I have got jungle logs, so that's good. But I don't appear to have any cocoa beans in here, so I'm hoping that I've got some in here. There we go. I have 60 beans. And thanks to my little chocolate shop that we built earlier in this season, oh, and my chocolate factory, I guess, we should have a whole bunch more cocoa beans in here. We do, 904. Let's take a bunch of those. Not all of them, I'll leave some there. And let's go make a very quick cocoa bean farm. A little bit like the one we've already got in here, but probably on a slightly bigger scale. How hard could it be? What could possibly go wrong? And just like that, it's done. Nice and simple. We've just got a little machine which is getting these cocoa beans and those cocoa beans in exactly the same way as before. They're coming through here, getting milled in there, and all of the tasty brown dye is going into our system and getting stored downstairs. Another floor done, and that's going to be plenty of cocoa going into our system. Bear in mind, nobody ever wants brown. You don't want brown glass, you don't want brown terracotta, you don't want brown concrete, so why are we even bothering with brown? And so with our third brown level finally in, it's time to work on the fourth level, which is going to be green dye, of which we could either just choose to crush down absolutely tons of different flowers, or we could just smelt cactuses. Cacti! Yes, cactuses. Anyway, yes, that's what we're going to be doing, a very small, dinky little cactus farm, because again, who needs green dye? You want lime, yes. Green? Meh. Maybe. But the problem is I don't have any cactus. We've never found cactus. We've never been anywhere for cactus, but I think we have been somewhere where there might be some. You see, a reasonable amount of time ago, we took a little bit of a journey all the way up here to a mesa where I did some digging for some terracotta, and just beyond that is a desert full of cactus. So I'm going to head over there now. And there we go, we now have another fully functional farm, this one getting us a little bit of green dye. It's a very simple system, just like the ones upstairs, but with saws instead of harvesters, which chop down the cactus when it grows like that, as you'll see now. That will then get sent into there, that'll get smelted into green dye, and that'll all go into there, which is now getting stored down there. Which means it's time to move on to the next farm, which is going to be for lime dye. Now, I could just use some of our white dye and the green dye we're getting from this to craft lime dye. However, I like lime dye. Lime dye's a lot more useful. You see, it's not just useful for crafting lime-looking things, it's also useful for making things like slime. But more importantly, it's used in the crafting of lime light blocks, which are basically neon blocks, and I really like the lime-looking ones. So yeah, we're going to need a reasonable amount of lime dye, not too much, which means it's time to pack up my bags from this level, throw a new floor in at this level, and make a sea pickle farm. But this time, instead of blasting the sea pickles, like you might normally do to get lime dye, we're going to go back to our milling method, because that gives us 2 lime dye and a little bit of green dye as well, which will bolster our green dye amounts and give us extra lime dye, which will be lovely. And that means the sea pickle farm doesn't have to be gigantic, which is good, because we really don't have all that much space just here. However, just like cactus, I don't actually have any sea pickles or any coral to grow it on, so I've come back to my starter island. I'm going to head in this direction because I believe not too far far away from here is a warm ocean. No, wait, that's a lukewarm ocean, and by the looks of the map, there's no coral in it. And that could be a problem. So in that case, I need to craft myself up a nature's compass. And for that, I need a normal compass and then just some logs and saplings. And the way we use this is type in the biome we want, which is warm ocean, start search, and that tells me where it is, which is 4,000 blocks away. Oh, jeez. So then what we do is we create a waypoint at the rough coordinates of where we're going, which is about 3,880 by 3,700-ish. Confirm that. That should, according to science, be over in that direction. Yes, it is. So now I just need to fly again. And here we go. I'm starting to see there's the smallest amount of coral I've ever seen in my life, but we should hopefully start seeing a bit of coral coming in to somewhere. Here we go. Oh, jeez. That was close. But yes, the ocean is lit down here, which means there will be sea pickles down there, and there's plenty of coral for me to be stealing. So let's go for a little bit of a dip. Remember that I can't breathe underwater, and try and mine as much of this before I drown. Drown. Yes, drowned. Drown. Yes, drowned. I don't really want blue for a sea pickle farm because it's very dark. I think I'm going to go for yellow. You just mined all the blue, won't you? I know I have. I only need a few bits. And there we go. After a bit of smashy, I've now got 45 yellow coral, a few sea pickles, and a few other bits and bobs as well, which means I can now go home. And here we are, back at my building of things. So back in my test world, this is what I've come up with. This is the smallest sea pickle farm that's going to be the most efficient that I can come up with, and it's basically a whole bunch of drills on top of some coral, which has got sea pickles in the middle, and then a deployer on top with a chute with a barrel full of bone meal. And when I turn this lever on, it all just goes a little bit crazy. It works very well. As soon as they grow, they get drilled, and they all end up in this backpack, which has got a magnet on there, and you can see just how ridiculously fast these are all coming through, which is, to be quite honest with you, way too fast for what we need. So we're probably going to end up running this at maybe, I don't know, 32 speed instead. We just don't need that much sea pickle. Look how quickly they grow and go and end up in the backpack. Easy! So a backpack then. I've got a spare one just down here from when a skeleton popped along in the night a couple of days ago and left it, and it's where I've been storing all of my junk. However, now it is going to be a sea pickle backpack, and that means I just need a magnet, and we should be able to make one of them relatively easy thanks to my not so recent excursions to the end. Just need a bit of redstone, a bit of lapis, a bit of iron, a diamond, some leather apparently, a bit of slime, and I think that should be everything we need. Okay, piston, sticky piston, upgrade base, pickup upgrade, magnet upgrade, advanced magnet upgrade, a double chest for all of the junk that's already in here. Might as well put the magnet upgrade in there. And now it's time to get cracking. And there we go, we now have a sea pickle farm that has to run so slowly that it's almost not running at all. And that's just so that the mill doesn't fill up completely. I think I can go a little bit faster than we are, but realistically, it's pretty much always running. We're currently on 8 speed. If I put that up to 12, perhaps, it might be a little bit better. But I don't want this thing backing up, the backpack filling up with sea pickles, and then us just ending up with sea pickle, well, floating all over the place. So there we go. Done. Ready for the next floor. And this is going to be the last floor with any form of particular complication. You see, we now need blue dye. And blue dye you can get from lapis, from cornflowers, and from blue vine seeds from the better end. And lapis is surely going to be the easiest way to do it, because you get a lot of blue dye for one piece of lapis. And thanks to my bits and bobs mod, lapis is renewable. See, all you need to do is combine a little bit of nether quartz with a bit of blue dye in a mixer, and you get lapis. And then when you crush that lapis down, you get at least 2 blue dye back, which means all you need is a quartz farm and then a little bit of lapis to get you started, and you've got infinite lapis and blue dye. However, the problem you may have already spotted is the fact that this then needs to be superheated, which means we need blaze cakes or some other form of superheated power, which I don't have. So a fancy little superheated lapis duplicating machine is right out, which means I'm really hoping we can do something similar to this with those end seeds and farm it that way. But I'm not convinced, peeps. I'm not convinced at all. Which brings me back to my test world. Now, I have here some end mycelium and some end moss, and if I plant the blue vine seeds on there and increase the random tick speed, you'll see that these things do eventually grow far faster on the mycelium, but then and you get these big old trees. Once the big old trees have grown, you can then knock them down, and I'm assuming if I was in survival mode, I might get some seeds back from that. I do. I got one. Oh, that's not ideal. In which case, let's try that again with a fortune hoe and see if we get anything better this time. Oh, it looks like I got more than one that time. I did. I got two. So we can chop those trees down and get our blue vine seeds. So at the very least, what we could do is have a deployer planting those, have another deployer doing some bone meals, and then having a third deployer with a diamond hoe in it knocking them down. However, I'm hoping that we can harvest these a little bit like we did here. Let's just get rid of a row of all of this soul soil, pop down a bunch of end mycelium, assuming I've got some of this in my storeroom, plant a bunch of these blue vine seeds, give them a bit of a grow, and then set this little thing loose on there and see what happens. Absolutely nothing. You get anything in you? No. Good to know. We'll get rid of the harvesters on the front of this thing and replace those with a bunch of saws instead. Glue all of that together. Hopefully the saws are going to completely ignore the seeds and just chop down the trees. And lock rotation. And once I get rid of that, it should go off and do absolutely nothing. Great. Okay, in which case I have another plan. Let's just plant a few more of these blue seeds along here. And this time I'm going to have that saw there, and this time I'm going to have a drill there. Let's just give those seeds a little bit of a grow, set this thing off again, and now we get absolutely nothing. Really? This is a bigger problem than I imagined. So how are we going to chop these down then? I guess with something a little bit like this, which is basically 3 deployers. One has bone meal, one has seeds, one has a hoe, which will eventually break, I would imagine, another backpack with a magnet on it, and this thing just grows the trees, that thing breaks them down, we get the light bulbs and the blue vine seeds. I'm not really that interested in the lanterns, but this should work, and it's generating a reasonable amount. And while we only get 1 for 1 on this, over time that's going to give us plenty. However, it is going to burn through an awful lot of bone meal, just generating a little bit of blue dye. But I do want to check, is this hoe getting damaged? It is not. Well, that's interesting. And I just want to make absolutely certain before I leave this that a saw and a drill is not going to do what we need it to do on here. So let's just move this deployer for a moment. Stick a bit of chain drive up there to power those. Turn that back on and see. Something's breaking it. It appears to be the saw. No, it was the drill. So we don't need a hoe at all. But is that now getting the seed still? It is. The question is, though, do I have any end mycelium and the blue spore seed things, whatever they are? Let's find out. I've got the blue seeds, and I have end mycelium. I have one piece. Oh, I've got end moss, though, and it works on that. That means we've got everything we need to make this work. And there we go. We now have a rather slow-moving blue dye farm, which is naturally creating any blue dye at all. It's just creating us more seeds and a bunch of these lanterns as well. But none of it's being stored up here. Of course, it's all being stored down there. And you might notice we have a second power line now coming in because I overstressed the motor down here, and changing the speed of it didn't affect the stress that it had. So I've had to add in another one here, which is a second little electrical connector. But hopefully if we hop down here, we can see, yep, we've got a whole bunch of those, but we've got hardly any of those at all. And that's because the deployers want to have 64 in each. Even though I've set these up to only allow 1 through at once, they will slowly fill up each of the deployers, and once the deployers have got a full 64 each, then we'll start actually accumulating some which we can then turn into blue dye. But we're going to have to be careful that we don't turn all of them into blue dye, because of course we need some of them to be planted to create more trees to turn those into blue dye. And the only way to turn these into blue dye is to just craft them into blue dye. So we're going to need an auto crafter, but we're going to have more auto crafters coming up very soon on a level below this one as we start crafting all of the other dyes that we can make from the dyes that we've already got. But we're still missing some, which is exactly what the next floor down is going to be for. Oh, and why am I not running this at full speed? Yeah, that's good. I just didn't want to burn through all of the bone meal, and while we don't have threshold switches on our storage system, if I let this run at full speed, we would literally burn through all of the bone meal. That being said, we've probably got quite a lot of bone meal right now. No, we have 772, which is not ideal. And what's also not ideal, as much as we're getting a lot of these lanterns, they can't be composted, which is a bit of a shame. And now the bone meal has completely run out, which is not ideal because the next floor that we're going to be making is going to need a lot of bone meal. Oh, jeez. We need to produce a lot more bone meal than we're producing, or use a lot less of it. You see, this will all balance out once we've got threshold switches on there and we're actually only making as much as we need from each of these farms. But until we reach that equilibrium, we're just going to be short on bone meal. And one way we can quickly achieve reaching our equilibrium is to just bring a whole bunch of bone meal over here. And we know where we've got loads, don't we? Your mum's house. Yeah, yes, it might. Yeah, no. Now, I could really do with a waystone over there, so I'd have to keep going back to the power station to use this one to get back to my storage system. But anyway, bone meal. Many bone meal. Steal that from there, put there instead. Put a bit of bone meal in it. Take the void upgrade and stick that in there. And away we go with the wrong coloured box, but it'll do. And there we go. Now that that's swapped out, we've got an absolute ton of bone meal to get through, which means we can create all the things we need. And this next farm's going to be nice and easy. In fact, we've done it before. So as usual, I'm just going to blast through it. But of course, I should tell you what it is, and that is a 2-tall flower farm for all of the different 2-tall flowers, which is going to give us red dye as well as green dye, yellow dye as well as orange dye, purple dye, magenta dye, and pink dye, and some more magenta dye. So we're going to get a whole bunch of different colours just from 4-tall flowers. And here it is, a simple yet effective 2-tall flower farm that is turned off. But if I turn it on, you'll see we've got a bunch of deployers out the back here which are very slowly bone mealing those flowers. They get duplicated, the hopper minecart picks them up, sends them through these hoppers onto these belts. They get sent through these milling machines and all of that goes inside of our storage system. And you can see, even at this slow speed, we're getting more flowers than the mills can deal with, which is very nice. So, yeah, I'm going to turn it off for now because we do have a bit of a problem. And the problem is soon to be... Oh, Jesus, probably it's bedtime. I think it might be safe. Anyway, yes, the problem is I have organised our storage a little better to see exactly what we've got. And we've got way too much brown dye. We have more brown dye than I could possibly know what to do with. We've got now plenty of stuff to make blue dye with, and I've now got a storage box for every single one of the dyes that we'll be getting, but you can see we've still got no cyan, we've got no blue, we've got no light blue, we've got no purple yet, but that's only because the 2-tall flower farm hasn't been running very quickly, and we've only got 64 grey dye, and that's just a placeholder that I shoved in there just to make sure that we had a space for all of the dyes. So, brown, too much. Green, lime green, well, it doesn't look like it's too much, but if we go back up to the lime green farm, we have a little bit too much sea pickle, so too much lime green, and probably way more blue than we need, and probably way more green than we need. At least the blue one hasn't backed up yet, and I wouldn't exactly say we've got a problem with the cactus farm. It's growing, but it's not over so quick. But yes, the cocoa bean farm is way too efficient. As you can see, it is completely backed up. This is not ideal. We need threshold switches. Now, fortunately, we have finished making all of the farms. The last floor that we're going to be doing is just going to be basically an auto-crafting farm to create all of the colours that we don't already have. And that's going to be going here. That means that we can actually have our little storage system on this floor here, and then we can have the ground floor as an actual ground floor entrance, and then send the items out to the trucks and things that will take them wherever else they need to go, coming out the back here. That's absolutely fine, but what it does mean is we should probably sort this out so that we can get some threshold switches on there and prevent us from overflowing everything we've got. So it's time to get out the trowel for one last time today, put in 2 more floors, because obviously we're worrying about decorating this building another day when we've actually got the materials to do it. And with those floors successfully in place, it's time to move the storage system into here in a way that we can use it to, well, turn on and off the farms, I guess. So it's not going to be pretty, it's not going to be decorated, but it should at least be functional. And first of all, we need to bring it over so that it actually goes underneath the floor to there. And I think it would make sense for us to have our controller there, perhaps, and then all of our drawers next to it like this. And now that all of those are in place and they're in a nice pretty pattern, I can now use the threshold switches to basically turn on and off the machines upstairs that we don't want to keep running. So let's start with our brown dye, considering that one is a big problem. If I put that on the back there, that's going to show me that this thing is pretty much full. Then all I need are some redstone links. I'm going to throw one onto there like that, grab myself a little bit of brown dye so that I can color code it, and then back up on the brown dye floor, what I need to do is basically actually make this on and offable with the redstone link. So the way I'm going to do that is to get rid of that lever, pop that on there like that, put it into receive mode, put that on brown and brown, and now that is only going to be active when the storage box is full, which is not what we wanted inverted. And we can invert it quite easily by going back down to our storage level and coming to this and clicking invert signal. So now this will be off unless there's enough room in it to actually start the machine. And if that is off, then so is this. So that's all good. Now I've just got to do that for all of the other farms. I don't need to do it for absolutely everything, but I do need to do it for quite a lot of them. And the ones I'm going to be doing it for mainly are the lime farm, the black dye farm, the cactus farm, the blue dye farm for when we ever get blue dye, and then we're going to need one that actually turns on and off the 2 tall flower farm, but that's going to be tricky because there's a whole bunch of different dyes coming into this, and there's no point in putting a threshold switch on the back of all of them. What we need is an AND gate, or an OR gate, or basically we need a gate. So what we're going to do down here is as follows. Oh, I need to do one on the white dye farm as well. Let me get all of these in place first, and then we'll worry about the 2 tall flower farm. Now we just need to stick a void upgrade onto there, and we're also going to need void upgrades on some of these other ones as well, particularly these lights, because we don't want to store tons of those, and some of the other coloured dyes once we get to that point. But right now, the next thing we need to do is control this 2 tall flower farm. So the main colours we're getting from the 2 tall flower farm are red, yellow, magenta and pink. So we need redstone links on the back of all of those. But from that farm we're also getting a little bit of orange, a little bit of purple and a little bit of green. So we're going to have a void upgrade on green, we're going to have one on purple, and we're going to have one on orange. We're also going to need them on those ones as well to stop them from overflowing. And what we're going to do now is set up a little system so that it won't stop until all of those are full, which probably means we don't want 3 capacity slots in all of these. I think 4096 of each of these different dye types will be absolutely more than enough. So let's save ourselves a whole bunch of money and take out a whole bunch of these capacity upgrades. So now that we've got the threshold switches set up downstairs, what we're going to do here is create a little circuit, and I think there's probably just about enough room to squeeze one in here. So I'm going to put 4 blocks there like that with the redstone links on the back this way. Going to set all of those to receive and then put on the corresponding colours of the dyes which we're using to control this, just like that. Now what we can do with this is add some redstone torches onto the front like this. We're going to have another redstone link over here, and let's just put, I guess, red and yellow onto there, and then we'll link all of these together so that they combine with that. Now, if any of these turn on, i.e. the box is too full, nothing's going to happen because the other torches will be lit. But if they're all full, then all of these torches will turn off, which means this will turn off. And if that's turned off, then we want this machine off, and the easiest way to turn this machine off is just to put a clutch into there with a redstone link on it, just like that. But we want this one inverting, which we're not going to do at this point. We'll put our red and yellow dye on there, and that's actually going to stop it. What we're actually going to do here is get rid of that, pop a block just there, have that redstone wire come onto there, put another redstone torch there, which is now inverted, put that redstone link back down there with the red and the yellow on there. And now if all of these are full, so all of them are turned on, all of these torches will turn off, which means there'll be no power to this redstone line, which means that torch will go on, that will turn that on, and that will stop the clutch over here, which means the farm will turn off. And that means that this entire system is now 100% fully automated in terms of starting and stopping themselves to make sure that they're not overrunning and producing way too much. But we're not quite finished yet. We've got one more thing to do, and that is the very last floor before our storage floor at this point here is to set up a handful of auto crafters to give us those last few colours of dye, which is basically blue, light blue, cyan and grey. But this is where things are actually going to get quite tricky. You see, it would be quite easy to set up a little auto-crafting setup like this that takes our little seeds and turns them into blue dye and puts them back into the system. But then that's going to take all of our seeds and turn them all into blue dye and put them all back into the system. So yet again, we need to resort to our friendly neighbourhood threshold switches to make sure that we don't take absolutely everything from the system. So what we need to do is come to our seed area here, put a threshold switch on there with a redstone link on it. This time we'll put on a seed and blue dye because that's what we're doing with that. And what we need to do is make sure that this turns on when we're running low. So we come back to this little machine over here. We come to this. We pop our little redstone signal on there, invert it, put one of those on there and one of those on there. And then when that's on, that will be locked. It can't transfer anything through the funnel, which means our seeds will be safe in their little storage area. And just hooking our little blue dye making machine up to our storage system and connecting our first crafter up to a little bit of power, we should now see this actually working. That is turning the blue seeds into blue dye, and that is because we've got more than enough of those in there. Once that gets below 50% though, which we can simulate here by just taking a bunch out. There we go. Let's just put a small amount in there. There we go, we've got a whole bunch less than that in there now. The redstone link has come on, which means that our little auto crafter has stopped auto crafting. And now I'm just going to put together the final ones for the final dyes. And there we go, with those few auto crafters in there, we are now producing every single colour of dye very easily. Okay, so purple and orange are not coming through ever so quickly because, well, they're just sort of spears from our too tall flower thing, but we're getting them, and I could always add in some more auto crafters to speed those up. But otherwise, yes, we are now getting a good supply of every single colour. Okay, light grey dye as well, we're getting us like a side thing, but again, we got so much black, we got so much grey, we did have a lot of white. Well, mate, look, okay, geez, we got more dye than we're ever gonna need, and it's all inside of this one big old fancy skyscraper that goes all the way up there, and all the farms are automated, they're all working. It's just very untidy, it needs a lot of decorating, which I can't do today because I don't have the materials.